I've spent most of my days in this old house, its creaking floorboards a comforting symphony to my ears. But lately, it feels more like a cage, one built by the hands of the very people I raised. I remember the laughter that once echoed through these halls, the warmth of my children's hugs, now replaced by whispered conversations behind half-closed doors. It's a peculiar ache, this feeling of abandonment, like being forgotten in a crowded room. They thought I wouldn't notice. My family, plotting their next move as if I were nothing more than a faded photograph on the wall. But I've been here long enough to know how to play the game. The twist? This house may be old, but it holds secrets, my secrets, and it's time to remind them who truly holds the key. Before I go on, subscribe to the channel. Here, we tell stories no one else does. Stories of grandmas and grandpas the world tried to silence. The sun had barely risen when I shuffled to the kitchen, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet as if they were complaining about the early hour. The air was crisp, the kind of freshness that only a late autumn morning could bring, carrying with it the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke. I leaned against the counter, my hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea, feeling its comforting heat seep into my palms. Outside, the world was slowly waking up, the faint rustling of squirrels playing in the yard punctuating the stillness. I glanced out the window, watching a flurry of colors dance on the trees, their leaves transitioning from green to gold with a grace that reminded me of days long gone. I often found solace in this quiet ritual, but today my heart was heavy. The whispers of discontent had reached my ears. My own flesh and blood, my grandchildren, the ones I spent years nurturing, were now plotting against me. They believed that my mind was slipping, that I couldn't handle the responsibilities of my home. It stung more than I would ever admit. I shook my head, trying to dispel the thoughts, but they clung to me like cobwebs in the corners of the attic. I had spent a lifetime in this house, infusing it with my spirit, each room echoing with memories, laughter, and the faint shadow of heartache. As I let my gaze drift, a small, worn rocking chair caught my eye. It creaked softly in the corner, a testament to countless evenings spent knitting while listening to the faint crackle of the radio. I recalled the days when my children were small, their tiny feet racing across the living room, leaving trails of joy in their wake. Each corner of the house held a story, a part of my heart clinging to the wallpaper and the echo of laughter that still hung in the air. But beneath those layers of happiness was an undercurrent of betrayal, a murmur of plans concocted in hushed voices. They thought I didn't know. They underestimated me. I finished my tea, placing the empty mug down with a resolute clink, the sound resonating in the quiet kitchen. I had always prided myself on my ability to see beyond the surface, to read the unspoken words in a room full of chatter. The house, my sanctuary, was also my armor, the walls imbued with secrets that had cradled me in moments of despair and joy alike. Little did they know that this place was not just wood and nails. It was a fortress built on decades of love, commitment, and yes, a bit of stubbornness. As I stood there, I could almost hear the distant murmurs of my grandchildren, plotting and planning. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. They had drawn their lines, convinced of their certainty, yet they failed to see the foundation upon which their plans rested. I would show them that I was more than a frail woman in a rocking chair. This was my home, my life, and I wouldn't let their youthful arrogance eclipse the shared history we had once embraced. I turned away from the kitchen window, determination setting in as I prepared to safeguard not just my possessions, but the very essence of what made me, me. I remember the days when I was someone else entirely. The bustling energy of my youth moved in rhythm with my ambitions, and I was driven by the unmistakable certainty that life had much more to offer. My kitchen was always filled with the smells of home-cooked meals that nurtured not just bodies, but also hearts. I was the center of my family's world, a role that brought me joy and purpose. I took pride in everything I did, from baking pies to helping my children with their homework, believing that my efforts were the foundation of their futures. I was the rock upon which many built their lives, yet I barely recognized the gradual encroachment of time as it chipped away at that identity. As the years turned into decades, life continued to twist and reshape me. Change can be so insidious, One day, you're handling everything with finesse, and the next, you find yourself fighting to remember what it was like to be that vibrant woman. The children grew up and left the nest, and the laughter that once filled these walls began to fade, leaving me with the whispers of memories echoing through the empty rooms. My husband, too, faded into silence, an absence that left an unfillable void. I filled my hours with activities to keep loneliness at bay, crossword puzzles, gardening, and even looking after the occasional stray cat. Yet, deep down, I felt a growing sense of invisibility, as if the world had forgotten me. When my children returned to the house to discuss their plans, I could feel their intentions shifting like shadows. They spoke of renovations, of selling this old place that had witnessed the tapestry of our lives, a home that seemed to pulse with the memories we had created. They discussed it as though they could rearrange my life like furniture, unaware of the emotional weight each beam and corner held for me. I wanted to shout, to declare my stake in this place that was as much a part of me as my own skin. They formed a plan, thinking they could easily take this away from me, without considering that I was still here, still alive, and still holding on to what mattered. On the day of the meeting, I put on my best dress, not for them, but for me. It felt good to reclaim a piece of my identity, if just for a moment. As they laid out their ideas, I listened. Each word was like a hammer striking wooden nails in my heart, puncturing the facade of my calm demeanor. I decided right then and there, enough was enough. When they glanced my way, their expressions were a mix of surprise and concern. They couldn't fathom the fire they'd reignited in me. No more would I stand by quietly while they plotted the future of what I had built. I let my voice break through their plans, trembling but powerful, claiming this space as my own. The unexpected shift in our conversation caused a ripple that shook our familial foundation. The stunned silence that followed my declaration morphed into a realization. I was still a part of this family, and I had my own desires. With each tear that fell, I reminded them of nights spent sharing dreams around the table, of traditions written into the very fabric of this home. I saw understanding dawning in their eyes, a clash of emotions as they absorbed the weight of my words. Perhaps they had underestimated the resilience of the woman who had always been their anchor. It was a moment of reckoning. I wasn't just an old woman sitting quietly in the corner. I was still here, still capable of love and determination, still deserving of my rightful place within these walls. When I think back to that time, I can still feel the chill that settled in my bones, a creeping unease that made my heart race. It was subtle at first, the whispers that floated around the family gatherings. My children, who I had raised and nurtured, seemed to huddle together in hushed conversations, their glances darting toward me, the matriarch, as if I were a stranger in my own home. I brushed it off, convincing myself that it was merely the usual squabbles that came with family dynamics. After all, who wouldn't have a disagreement about my famous pot roast? They loved me. I had no reason to believe otherwise. But as days turned into weeks, the whispers grew louder and more pronounced. I began noticing small changes in their behavior. The way they swept by me in the kitchen, avoiding my eyes as they discussed financial matters in the next room, flutters of worry skimming my heart. I had always been the glue that held this family together, sharing stories and laughter over steaming cups of tea. Now I felt like a ghost in my own home, watching them plot and scheme like characters in a poorly written play. It hurt, more than I could express. The very walls that had heard the laughter of my grandchildren now echoed with a silence that made my skin crawl. The realization came in a flash, like a bolt of lightning cutting through the darkness. I caught a snippet of conversation one afternoon, just outside the living room. If she were to move to that assisted living place, one of them whispered, and I paused, frozen in my tracks. They were planning my future without me, as if I were an inconvenience, not the woman who had sacrificed everything for their happiness. My heart sank, and the world around me blurred. I had worked tirelessly to build a life for us. Every room in this house held a memory. Did they really believe I would just slip away, forgotten like an old sweater? It was then that a spark ignited inside me, a fierce determination to reclaim my narrative. My knees, worn and aching, could still carry me through the halls of this house with purpose. I spent days plotting, quietly observing their plans, as if I were the detective in a mystery novel. I realized they underestimated not only my love for this house, but my will to hold on to it. I took the small steps needed to dance around their plans, gathering documents, checking the deeds, and remembering every detail that made this house ours. Memories of laughter intertwined with the scent of fresh cookies became my shield. So, I devised my own plan. It wasn't about revenge, rather it was about reclaiming my agency, reminding them that I was still very much in control. One evening, as they gathered around the dinner table with their murmured discussions, I cleared my throat, an act that made them jump in surprise. "Let's talk about the future, shall we?" I said, a calmness cloaked over my rising intensity. I had their attention now, and I could see the tension in their faces, a mix of surprise and apprehension. I was ready to take a stand, to speak the truth that had been silenced for far too long in this house I had built with love. I would reclaim my space, my story, and my family. They may have planned against me, but they forgot one crucial thing. This was my home, and I intended to keep it that way. There's a stillness that settles in a house like an aging blanket when the noise of life is stripped away. I've lived in this home for over 50 years, and yet the distance that has grown between my family and me feels like a chasm that widens every day. I remember the laughter that echoed through the halls, the sun-drenched kitchen where I'd bake cookies with my grandkids, and the countless family gatherings filled with love. But time has a way of changing things, and as the years slipped by, that vibrancy faded into a suffocating silence. It started gradually, the little things that signaled their retreat. My children, my boy and girl, busy with their own lives, began to visit less frequently. The calls became fewer, the texts less warm. My heart would flutter with hope whenever I heard a car pull up, only to sink when it turned out to be someone else. I wanted to bridge the distance, to coax them back with stories and memories, but I feared I was becoming a nuisance, a relic of times they had moved past. I often sat in my favorite armchair, the one by the window, staring at the world outside, feeling as if I were trapped within the walls of my own home. But then I discovered something that caught me off guard. My children had a plan, a scheme that involved my beloved house. I overheard them one afternoon as I pretended to shuffle through old photographs in the attic. Their voices carried through the thin wood like whispers in the night. They spoke of selling the house, of turning it into something that would benefit them more than it ever had me. I clutched the edges of the photo album, feeling a hot wave of betrayal wash over me. Did they not see this place for what it was? A sanctuary steeped in years of love, laughter, and memories? The realization hit me hard, a gut punch suffused with heartache. I thought about the walls that had witnessed my joys and sorrows, the garden my husband had tended with such love, the kitchen table that had seen more arguments than I'd care to remember. This was my home, and yet it appeared that to them, it was merely an asset. My heart ached at the idea of losing it, not just the physical structure, but everything it represented. My family's history, my late husband's touch, the remnants of childhood dreams. In that moment, I resolved to take a stand, to remind them of the value embedded in those walls. I planned it carefully, summoned the courage that had once been so abundant in my youth. I would invite them over for dinner, a gathering reminiscent of old times. I would prepare their favorite dishes, flood the living room with the fragrance of nostalgia. As they walked through the door, I wanted them to remember, to feel the pulsing heartbeat of this home, to understand that it was not just a building, but a haven rich with our shared lives. I could almost hear the echoes of their laughter as I set the table, imagining the joy that would radiate once more, blocking out the silence that had grown so oppressive. When the day finally arrived, I stood nervously at the door, my stomach a knot of anticipation and fear. Their smiles warmed my heart, but I couldn't shake the feeling of distance lurking beneath the surface. I served the food, watched as they picked at their plates. It was then I knew. I had to open my heart, to reveal the truth of my fears. I shared my feelings, my loneliness, and the hurt I felt upon discovering their plan. In that moment, I saw their eyes widen, a realization dawning that perhaps, in pursuing their own lives, they had overlooked what truly mattered. Silence hung in the air, but it was not the same silence I had grown accustomed to. It was charged, hopeful, a bridge slowly being built between us. The day I discovered their plan, I sat in my sun-faded armchair, the afternoon light filtering through the lace curtains, casting delicate shadows on the worn-out carpet. It was the same chair where I'd spent countless hours knitting in peace, surrounded by memories and the scent of lavender. I had heard whispers, faint and hushed, during family gatherings, but I had never paid them much heed. After all, family was family, wasn't it? But as I listened to my son and daughter-in-law discussing their future in my own living room, I felt that familiar warmth turn cold. It was as if the air had thickened, suffocating me with an undeniable realization that they were not only plotting to take this house, but planning to take my very home away from me. I could see it in their eyes, the way they glanced at each other, their mutual understanding thick as thieves. "Once Grandma is gone," my daughter-in-law said, with that overly sweet tone she used when she thought she was being clever, "we can finally turn this place into something modern. Just think of the potential." She had always been fixated on the potential of things, often disregarding the sentimental for the sake of aesthetics. My heart sank as I realized that they had been discussing a future that didn't include me, a future where my memories were nothing more than dusty relics to be discarded. In their minds, this house had become a means to an end, an investment, a project. The first emotional blow hit me hard, leaving me gasping for air. I had poured every ounce of love into this house, nurtured it like a garden that had blossomed through the seasons of our lives. Each corner cradled stories of birthday parties, holiday gatherings, and quiet moments. Each wall hummed with laughter and tears alike. To them, it was merely a structure, a chance to remodel and resell, but for me, it was a vessel of love that had sheltered generations. I wanted to shout, to express the fury that bubbled within, yet I remained silent, afraid that my words would fall on deaf ears. What had happened to the days when family meant loyalty, compassion, and respect? How could they so easily dismiss a lifetime of love for monetary gain? I clasped my hands tightly in my lap, feeling the weight of my own sorrow. The room felt smaller, as if the walls were inching in, echoing my loneliness. I thought about the countless sacrifices I had made as a mother, the nights spent waiting for my children to return home safe, the moments I had put their needs before my own. For years I had been their anchor, their emotional harbor. Yet here they were, with plans not only to uproot me from my home, but to erase my presence altogether. The betrayal stung deeper than I could have anticipated. It mingled with the ache of my old bones, reminding me of my own mortality and insignificance in their plot. But beneath the sorrow, a flicker of resolve ignited within me. I knew this house better than they ever could. I had the power of ownership, a document signed long before they'd breathed their first breaths, and that paper had weight, more than they understood. It felt like a secret weapon, one that had been hidden beneath years of family gatherings and casual conversations. The irony settled in, curling around me like the comforting blankets I used to knit. They thought they had the upper hand, but what they didn't realize was that my roots ran deep and my spirit was not easily quelled. I would stand my ground, and I would fight for my home, for my stories, to ensure that this house remained a place of warmth and love, a reminder that family is more than a plan. It's a bond that should not be so easily broken. It was a dreary Wednesday morning when I first noticed that something wasn't quite right. The air was thick with tension as I sat in my favorite armchair, a well-worn piece that had cradled me through countless evenings of knitting and reminiscing. My family had gathered, their laughter filling the living room, but beneath the surface chatter, I could sense a current, a whisper of a plan that didn't include me. It wasn't long before I learned the truth. My children had taken it upon themselves to discuss selling the house, the one I had lived in for over 50 years. I felt my heart sink as the realization washed over me. They thought I was too frail to manage this old place, but they had forgotten one crucial detail. This house was mine. They'd underestimated my attachment, not just to the bricks and mortar that sheltered us, but to the very essence of our family's history, steeped in its walls. Memories flowed like a river, uninvited but familiar. The sound of my husband's laughter echoing off the walls, the first steps of my children on the hardwood floors, The birthday parties where we celebrated in our little backyard. This house was more than a property. It was a vessel of our shared past. Yet, as I observed them huddled in conversation, I could feel the gravity of their plan pulling at my resolve. I resolved to confront them, to remind them that deciding the future of our home without my input was a betrayal. With shaky hands, I set aside my knitting and approached the group. My voice trembled, but I stood firm, determined to reclaim my role as the matriarch of this family. "What on earth makes you think I would want to sell this house?" I demanded, my eyes flitting from one guilty face to another. Their defensiveness was palpable, their disbelief at my interference evident. They proclaimed it was for my own good, that I would be far better off in a cozy retirement home where someone could care for me. But they failed to see that my worth wasn't measured in how easily I could be moved away from the heart of our family. As they argued their points, my frustration began to dissolve into a deep-seated sadness. Did they really think so little of me? I had fought for this house, fought for every inch of it, through storms and life's unpredictabilities. It was a sanctuary, a testament to my resilience. Just as I was about to retreat, a strain of memory surfaced. The documents I had tucked away in the back of a drawer, dusty, yet still potent. I recalled the title deed, the papers that bore my name, not just as the homeowner, but as a rightful owner of the house's legacy. It was time to remind them of that little detail, one that had somehow slipped from their minds. I turned back to my children, feeling a renewed sense of purpose as I spoke my next words. "You should know that I have the title deed, right here in this house," I said, my voice steadying. Their expressions shifted from annoyance to shock, and I could sense the urgency in their minds as they realized that this was not just a conversation about a house. It was a confrontation with the past they had overlooked. The plans they had so carefully crafted began to unravel before their eyes. I could feel the weight of generations shifting in the air, the tension between the desire to protect me and the longing for autonomy in their lives. It was a difficult balancing act, but at that moment I reclaimed my role, not just as their mother, but as the guardian of our family's legacy. I remember the day the phone rang, and it shattered the calm of my quiet home. A voice I recognized only too well, but hadn't heard in years, cracked through the static, a distant relative reaching out, which set the gears in motion for something I'd long buried. They had plans, whispers of selling the house that had cradled our family for generations. I felt an old wound reopen, a deep ache ignited by betrayal and the foolishness of young hearts. You see, as the eldest, I had always been the guardian of our shared history. But they seemed to forget how much this house meant to me, how much it was intertwined with every laugh, every argument, every tear, the very fabric of our collective memory. They gathered, eager to discuss the future, not realizing that in forgetting the past, they were stepping on sacred ground. When I walked into that meeting, I was met with the familiar faces of cousins and a niece, each believing themselves to be the rightful heirs to the treasure that was my home. It was ironic, really, how they spoke of monetary value and upgrading as if the walls were simply bricks and mortar. They couldn't see that this house held the laughter of children, the heartbeats of family dinners, and the echoes of my late husband's gentle voice. I could feel the tension in the air. It was thick enough to slice through, and I was determined to protect what was rightfully mine. As they pored over papers and made plans, I silently reflected on the countless summer evenings I spent on the porch, listening to the symphony of crickets while my children played tag in the yard. Those memories washed over me like a tide, reminding me that every inch of that house held a piece of my heart. They didn't understand that they were not just discussing a property, they were speaking about a legacy. When I finally spoke up, my voice trembled, a raw mixture of sadness and anger. "This house isn't merely a structure, it is our history," I said, my heart racing. They looked at me with a mix of confusion and annoyance, as if I were an old book they were tired of reading. What I didn't anticipate was their dismissal, a feeling worse than any cut I had ever suffered. They debated amongst themselves, treating me like a ghost haunting their plans. "She's just sentimental," one cousin muttered. I felt as though the ground beneath me threatened to pull me into its depths. How could they strip me of the memories, as if they were just trinkets to toss away? They were the ones who had forgotten the laughter shared around the dinner table, the summer barbecues, the way the sunlight danced through the kitchen window at dawn. It was a wound that never truly healed, a scar left from battles fought over long-forgotten disagreements around family holidays. But as their plans unfolded, I felt something inside me steel and harden. Maybe they thought they could bulldoze their way through my love for this house, but what they didn't realize was that my ownership ran deeper than paperwork or signatures. The land beneath my feet was mine, and with it came years of wisdom and tenacity that they underestimated. They had misjudged my quiet demeanor for weakness, but I was not just an old lady in a rocking chair. I was the keeper of our family's stories, the defender of our legacy. With renewed determination, I laid out my own plan, one that would remind them whose house it truly was. It was time they learned the lessons of love and memory I had carried long before they ever stepped foot in my living room. It was a bright Tuesday afternoon, the sun filtering through the tall oak trees lining my old street. I was sitting on my porch, sipping sweet tea and watching the world pass by like a slow, deliberate clock. The quiet hum of the neighborhood had always been a source of comfort, and for the most part, I was content in my solitude. That was until I heard the unmistakable crunch of gravel beneath tires. My heart skipped a beat, a strange mix of dread and anticipation bubbling up. Visitors were rare. Most had forgotten about me, or perhaps about the house that had witnessed a lifetime of laughter, tears, and memories. As the car pulled up, I squinted to see through the sun's glare. It was an old blue sedan, nothing fancy, but I recognized it instantly. My heart raced as I realized who it was. It was my estranged daughter, Lydia. I had not seen her in over 5 years, an eternity in mother-daughter time. The last time we spoke, words had been hurled like stones during an argument that spun out of control. The fallout had been a chasm between us, carved deep and filled with hurt. Yet here she was, standing in my driveway, her figure framed by the setting sun, looking uncertain and vulnerable. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Memories of happier times flooded my mind, the laughter we shared, the holidays spent together, the endless conversations about worldly dreams and aspirations. But they were quickly overtaken by the bitter taste of our last encounter. I chose to remain seated, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched her approach. I could see the years etched on her face. She was no longer the young girl full of hope, but a woman weathered by life's unpredictability. I took a deep breath, hoping to gather some courage to face the storm of emotions brewing inside. "Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper as she stepped onto the porch. I could see tears shimmering in her eyes, reflecting a vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. I've been thinking about you a lot." The sincerity in her tone caught me off guard, and for a moment I felt a flicker of warmth. I rose slowly from my seat, my body feeling heavier with each movement. There was so much to unpack, so many unspoken apologies and grievances swirling in the air between us. My heart was caught in a whirlwind of emotions: love, anger, regret, and the familiar ache of a mother's wish for reconciliation. Before I knew it, I had crossed the porch and closed the gap between us, wrapping my arms around her in a tight embrace. Lydia stiffened for a brief second, then melted into my arms. It felt surreal, like coming home after being lost for so long. The scent of her hair was the same, an echo from the past that brought tears to my eyes. We stood there, locked in a moment that seemed to stretch eternity. I felt old, yet renewed, burdened, yet light. The walls we had built over the years crumbled slowly, brick by brick, as we clung to one another tightly. Perhaps we could mend this broken bond. This unexpected reunion could be the beginning of something beautiful, a chance to rediscover what we had once lost. But as we lingered in the embrace, a thought flicked through my mind. Had she come back with a motive, or was this moment genuine? The idea of hidden agendas and plans brewed in the background, but for now, I pushed those worries aside. I chose to embrace the hope of this moment. I invited her in for some iced tea, my heart both heavy and light, as I realized that perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of a healing process for both of us. In my house, where the air was thick with memories and love, we would take our first shaky steps toward forgiveness. I remember the chill that swept through me as I stood at the threshold of my own home, the place where I had raised my children, celebrated anniversaries, and weathered countless storms. It had been nearly a week since I first overheard them, my own children, discussing their plans to sell the house I had poured my heart into for decades. They thought I was oblivious, that I was too old and frail to notice the whispered conversations and furtive glances. But I had my ears wide open and a heart that was still fiercely protective of the home I loved so dearly. The day of the confrontation arrived with an overcast sky, as if the world itself understood the weight of what was about to unfold. I could hear their laughter from the kitchen as I made my way downstairs, a sound that felt strangely foreign in a house that had been my sanctuary. I took a deep breath, steadied my resolve, and walked into the room, ready to face them, ready to reclaim my space. My children, who had always been my joy, now looked startled as they turned to face me, laughter freezing in their throats. I could see it in their eyes, guilt, anxiety, surprise. But I was no longer a mere spectator in my own life. "Can we talk?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt. They shared a glance before slowly nodding, and I gestured them to sit at the worn kitchen table, a place that had seen more arguments and resolutions than I could count. I took my seat, the wooden chair creaking beneath me, and felt a surge of determination. It was my turn to speak. "I know what you've been planning," I began, my heart pounding, "and I won't allow it. This is my home, and I plan to stay." I watched as their expressions shifted, confusion mixed with remorse. My eldest, Sarah, finally spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. "Mom, we thought it would be easier for you. The upkeep, the repairs." She trailed off, but I could hear the underlying implication loud and clear. They believed they were doing what was best for me, but they didn't truly understand my needs, my love for this house. To them, it was a burdensome relic of my past. To me, it was a living memory, saturated with life and laughter. I felt the hot sting of anger rising within me, a protective fire igniting at the thought of them uprooting me from my sanctuary without even asking for my opinion. "I don't need you to decide for me," I replied, my voice firm now. "I may be old, but I am still capable of making my own choices. I want to stay here, in the only home I've ever known." The atmosphere shifted as I leaned forward, feeling the weight of every word I uttered. I could see the realization dawning on them, the understanding that I wasn't simply a frail old woman waiting for help. I was their mother, fierce and steadfast in my desires. I didn't want to be viewed as a burden. I wanted to be seen as the woman who had built this home with love. Their faces softened, and the storm of emotions swirled around us. Not just my own, but theirs too. I could tell they were wrestling with the unexpected twist of our conversation. It was a moment of raw vulnerability, and I felt my chest tighten as I poured out my heart. "This house holds my memories, your memories. It's not just a place, it's a tapestry of our lives woven together." Silence enveloped us, and I realized we were at a crossroads. How would they respond? Would they respect my wishes? Or would they retreat into their preconceived notions of what was best for me? Either way, I had found my voice, and for the first time in a long while, I felt empowered. It was a chilly Tuesday morning when I first caught wind of their plot. My daughter Mary and her husband Tom sat in my living room, whispering in hushed tones that skittered and flickered like the candle flames on my side table. I pretended to busy myself with a tattered magazine, flipping through pages but hardly reading a word. Years of raising my children had trained me to listen with my heart, and the worry began to knot in my stomach as I discerned a plan brewing between them. They thought I was oblivious, that my age clouded my mind, but I was more vigilant than they gave me credit for. As I listened, I pieced together bits of their conversation. It wasn't just idle chatter about the weather or their jobs, it was much more insidious. They were discussing my house, my home that had sheltered my family through triumphs and trials. "It's too big for her now," Mary said, her voice heavy with a mix of concern and something more calculating. "We could easily sell it and find her a nice little apartment, something manageable." The words stung, setting off a storm of emotions inside me. If they thought I was going to let them make decisions about my life without consulting me, they were sorely mistaken. The realization settled like a weight on my chest, but a flicker of defiance ignited within me. I had spent decades managing this household, nurturing each brick of this house with love and warmth. I gathered my courage and gently interrupted their plotting with a soft but firm, "What are you two planning?" Their surprise was palpable. Their eyes widened, and for a moment I could see hesitation flash across their faces before Mary quickly composed herself. "Oh, Mom, we were just discussing some ideas about the house," she stammered, feigning a casualness that didn't quite match the urgency of their conversation. But I could see through the ruse. Instead of confronting them head-on, I decided to play this game on my terms. I invited them to join me in a family meeting, a discussion that would include everyone, my son, David, and his wife, Linda. I could see the uncertainty in their expressions, a hint of panic at the thought of having their plan exposed. But I pressed forward. I prepared my heart, knowing that whatever came next would require not just strategy, but emotional resilience. I called David, and within a couple of hours, our traditional Sunday family gathering turned into an impromptu summit under my roof, much to the surprise of Mary and Tom. When everyone arrived, I smiled and welcomed them, my demeanor calm and inviting, masking the turmoil within. I took a deep breath and launched into a nostalgic account of my years in this home, the laughter and tears, the birthdays celebrated, the anniversaries marked. I spoke of the memories that held this place together, a tapestry woven through generations. As I painted images of our family's history, I saw Mary's expression shift from skepticism to something softer, perhaps a hint of remorse. This was not just a house, it was our family's heartbeat. And in that moment, surrounded by loved ones gathered in my living room, I realized that what they had planned against me could not sever the profound connections I had nurtured here, nor would it erase the hidden ownership I had over not just the house, but the very essence of our family. The unexpected action of standing firm on my ground was about to unfold. I had never thought I would find myself in such a perplexing situation. It was a chilly autumn afternoon when the whispers began, swirling around my quiet home like the falling leaves outside. My family, the very ones I had nurtured and cared for, had plotted against me, thinking they could easily take possession of my house. To them, it was all about the value, a property that they believed would secure their financial futures. But what they underestimated was my tenacity, the roots I had laid down in this home, and the love that filled every corner of it. In the beginning, it all seemed innocent enough. My children and grandchildren would visit with their suggestions, chatting about renovations and improvements that would increase its value. Although I appreciated their enthusiasm, I could sense an underlying current bubbling beneath the surface. As they gathered around my worn dining table, laughter and memories intermingled with subtle glances shared between them that I caught only out of the corner of my eye. It was as if they were presenting a performance, while I, the audience, remained blissfully unaware of their true intentions. The house was mine, and I had every intention of keeping it, but I felt the shifting tides of their ambitions. As the weeks went by, the conversations around the house turned from joyous to scheming. My eldest daughter, Angela, once my closest ally, began to speak more frequently about my age, my supposed need for care. "Mom, have you thought about moving into a retirement community? It would be so much easier, and we could take care of the house for you," she would say, her tone dripping with concern. I knew it wasn't genuine love behind those words, but a keen sense of opportunity. I couldn't articulate the betrayal I felt, but it carved deep grooves in my heart. The thoughts of becoming a burden and losing my home sent shivers down my spine, igniting a fire of defiance that I thought had long since dimmed. But as they plotted, I observed quietly. I didn't want to confront them directly, not yet. Instead, I decided to play along, to watch their moves unfold like a game of chess. I made small adjustments, hiding important documents, safeguarding my will, even considering a lawyer's counsel. I remembered how my late husband always said, "Keep your cards close to your chest." Each time they visited, I practiced my best poker face while their plans grew ever bolder. They began speaking in hushed tones as if I were too frail to understand their machinations. But I was more alert than they gave me credit for. The day of reckoning came on a gray afternoon, one that mirrored my mood. I gathered my family in the living room, where generations of memories lingered. It felt heavy with anticipation and unspoken truths. They didn't expect me to put my foot down, but I could see the shock on their faces as I revealed that I had consulted with a lawyer about my estate and my rights. The house, once a point of contention, was revealed to be protected under my name alone, and any plans they had schemed behind my back would crumble beneath the weight of legality. They looked at one another in disbelief, as if confronted by a ghost. Their expressions shifted from surprise to indignation, and I felt an unexpected surge of power as I held steady in the face of their dissatisfaction. As I sat in my old rocking chair, the familiar creaks of its wooden frame soothed my weary bones, but my mind was anything but serene. The most unsettling thoughts had taken up residence in my heart, like squatters in a house without a lock. It all started with the whispers I overheard one evening during a family gathering. My sons, my own flesh and blood, made plans so intricately woven, so clandestine, that it left me feeling like an outsider in my own home. Their words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of betrayal, and I couldn't shake the sense of impending loss. They spoke of dividing the house, selling it, stripping it of its soul, all under the guise of helping me. Yet what stung the most was not just their intentions, but the sheer confidence they had in their decision. They thought I was past my prime, too frail to fight back, but I was still in possession of my faculties, and deep down, a flicker of defiance began to ignite within me. I remembered the countless nights I spent tending to this house, oiling the floorboards and painting the windowsills. This home was my sanctuary, a collection of memories that embodied my essence. The thought of them taking it away felt like a mother watching her children play with fire, desperately wanting to snuff it out. I realized then that my ownership had been obscured, not by a legal title, but by the emotional labor I had invested over the decades. With newfound determination, I decided to confront them, but not before taking a step back to consider my approach. These were not just my sons, they were my legacy. They had grown up under this roof, playing in the backyard, celebrating birthdays, and even enduring heartaches. I had sacrificed for them, poured myself into their upbringing. Yet here they were, conspiring against the very foundation of our family. As unsettling as it was, I had to remind myself that their intentions stemmed from a place of love, albeit misguided. I wanted to show them that I was still capable, still a woman who had carved her own path in life, and who would not simply fade away into the background. The day of reckoning arrived, a warm Saturday afternoon that belied the storm brewing within my heart. I gathered my courage and invited them all over, with the intention of sitting them down for a frank conversation. The laughter and chatter at first masked the tension in the air, but I sensed it simmering beneath the surface. I started gently, recalling stories from our past, memories of happiness, struggles, and moments that had defined who we were as a family. With each anecdote, I could see the realization dawning on their faces, reminding them of what truly mattered. The love that this house had nurtured, the history etched into its walls. When I finally broached the subject, I saw their expressions shift from amusement to confusion. I spoke not just about property and ownership, but about the emotional resonance this place held for all of us. I asked them to consider their actions, not merely from the perspective of convenience, but through the lens of legacy. This was not just my house. It was a tapestry of our shared lives, a vault containing laughter and sorrow, intertwined like roots of an ancient tree. In sharing my voice, I felt the tension unravel. It became clear that while they thought they were protecting me, they had overlooked the most crucial truth. My autonomy, my space, and the memories we carried together were something that could not simply be taken away. By the time we reached the end of the conversation, I realized they had not only forgotten the house was mine, but they had also underestimated the bond that tied us together, forever woven into the fabric of this cherished home. I sat quietly in my favorite chair by the window, the sunlight streaming in just enough to warm my face, but not so much that it felt intrusive. Outside, the world was alive with spring, the birds chirping, flowers blooming, and children laughing in the nearby park. But inside, I was grappling with a storm. The plan they concocted against me had been simmering under the surface for some time, and I finally caught wind of it. My heart sank when I realized their intentions. I never thought my own family would plot against me, lamenting my age and my decision to remain in the home that I had built from the ground up. This wasn't just a house, it was my sanctuary, filled with memories of laughter, love, and even sorrow, but always the comfort of belonging. It was my daughter, Clara, who initiated the discussions with her siblings, suggesting that perhaps it was time for me to downsize for my own good. They didn't see me as capable anymore, as anything more than a fragile old woman needing help. I appreciated concern, but I was still sharp, still able. However, the rift had grown, and I could sense the disapproval in their whispers, the furtive glances exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. I wanted to confront them, to demand an explanation, but fear kept me silent. I didn't want to create a chasm between us deeper than they already assumed I had. It was an unspeakable irony. I had spent my life building bridges, yet here I was, standing on the edge of an impending divide. One evening, I decided that instead of confronting them outright, I would create a plan of my own, something unexpected to turn this table. It wasn't about outsmarting them. It was about reclaiming my autonomy. I began writing a letter, pouring out my heart, expressing my desire to remain in the home I loved, and reminding them of all the memories we had shared. I also decided to outline a few ideas to ease their minds. Perhaps I could hire help for some tasks, or we could establish a schedule for family visits. The intention was to create a sense of partnership instead of conflict. I signed it with love, hoping they would see the truth in my words and not just the fears behind them. A week later, I arranged a family dinner, an invitation that was met with trepidation but also curiosity. The table was set, the aroma of my famous chicken pot pie filling the air. As we sat down, I watched their faces sink into the familiar grooves of old habits. My heart raced as I began to read aloud my letter. With each word, I felt a shiver of vulnerability, but also a sense of liberation. I spoke of my love for my home, my desire to remain independent, and the joy I found in my little routines. It was a delicate dance, trying to bridge the divide without pushing them away. I saw their expressions shift, some reading regret, while others were simply stunned. By the end of the dinner, we had reached a truce, if not a complete reconciliation. Clara spoke first, her voice shaking as she apologized for her misguided notion that I could no longer manage. Her brothers chimed in, admitting they had been misled by fear rather than love. We talked until the sun dipped beneath the horizon, sharing stories and laughter interspersed with moments of reflection. While I knew they still worried about me, it felt like my reclaiming my agency had carved out a new path for us. The house remained mine, but it now felt as though it belonged to all of us again. It was a bittersweet victory, but in that moment, I understood that resolution could exist without complete reconciliation, and that was enough for me. I remember the day my children gathered in my living room, an air of hushed conspiracies hanging over them like a thick fog. I sat quietly in my armchair, a sturdy piece of furniture that had seen better days, but felt like my companion. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the worn carpet, and I couldn't help but watch the shadows dance as they whispered amongst themselves. The pages of their lives turned, yet mine seemed to linger, stubborn and immovable. I could feel the tension radiating from them. They were making a plan against me, or so it felt. Little did they know, I had already seen through the ruse. It was clear that they intended to make the decision for me about my home, our old family house that had cradled generations of our memories. My daughter, Sarah, had the most fervent look in her eye, and my son, Tom, was nodding along, caught in her enthusiasm. It was as if they believed that the mere act of gathering would create a new reality, one where they made choices about my life without even consulting me. The irony was palpable. This home wasn't just four walls and a roof, it was a tapestry of our lives woven together with love, laughter, and sometimes tears. While their plans may have appeared noble in their eyes, they forgot one important detail. The ownership of the house wasn't theirs to decide. As they discussed the prospect of updating the house, planning renovations that would strip away a lifetime of memories, I felt a simmering indignation rise within me. I was not merely the old woman in the chair. I held the deed in my name, a testament to years of heart and soul put into each room. At that moment, I decided that they needed a reminder of who truly held the reins in this household. I watched them while sipping my tea, the warmth and bitterness mingling in a way that felt oddly comforting. With each sip, I plotted my own course, a symbolic final gesture that would bring them back to reality. That evening, I pulled out the family photo album tucked away on the shelf. As the pages turned, the flood of memories washed over me. Pictures of their first steps, birthday parties, and summer gatherings, each snapshot imprinted in my heart. I found that I had a hidden power in these very memories, a legacy that had not yet faded. With a quiet resolve, I gathered all the family photos and framed them in a collage of love, laughter, and history. Each one of those faces a reminder of the bonds we shared. I then hung it prominently in the living room, right above the spot where they had plotted their plans against me. I enjoyed the satisfaction of envisioning their reactions when they spotted it. The next day, when they returned to the house, their stunned expressions were my reward. The photos were not just decorations. They were anchors to our past and symbols of the life we had built together. I watched as they moved closer, their eyes flitting from one cherished memory to another, the tension unraveling with every glance. The atmosphere shifted as they were reminded, not just of their childhood, but of the lessons we had learned, of the love we had shared, and of my unshakable connection to this home. It became clear that their plans, however well-intentioned, had overlooked an important truth. This house was not merely property. It was a living testament to our family and to my ownership, both physical and emotional. In the end, the conversation turned, and joint laughter echoed in the living room once more. They began to see that their attempts to help had been misguided. Instead of discussing changes, we began to reminisce. My symbolic gesture had served its purpose. It opened up a space for discussion instead of dictating decisions. The hidden ownership they had glossed over was rooted in our shared experiences, in the legacy of love that this home represented. And as I sat there, I felt a warmth that stemmed from knowing I had reestablished my role in this family's story, reminding them of the strength of our bond. I was not just grandma in an armchair, I was the heart of this home, and that was something they could never take from me. I've spent most of my life navigating the tangled web of family relationships, and I've learned that sometimes the most painful betrayals come from those we love the most. In the twilight of my years, as I sit in my well-worn chair by the window, I find myself reflecting on the plan they devised behind my back. It was their belief that my age had dulled my instincts, that I was merely a shadow of myself, waiting for the inevitable close of my chapter. What they didn't reckon with was the strength that resides in experience and the deep-rooted connections I had cultivated in my time here, this house that had been both a sanctuary and a battleground. At first I was blindsided, shocked by the whispers that floated through the air like fog in the early morning. They thought they were clever, those scheming children of mine, plotting against me as if I was a stranger rather than their mother. The thought that they could conspire to take what I had built with my own hands felt like a thief in the night, stealing pieces of my heart as they plotted. But their underestimation became my fuel, each snide remark and secret meeting pushing me to rise from the ashes of their misguided intentions. I realized then that this was more than a fight for my home. It was a fight for recognition, for respect, for the very essence of who I was. I considered my options carefully, weighing them like precious stones on a scale of rationale. I could have let it slide, allowing them to think they had outsmarted me. But that would mean surrendering my history, my story, to their narrow vision of what I should be. No, I had to dig in my heels, protect what was mine, not out of spite, but out of sheer necessity. I remembered all the sacrifices I made, sleepless nights spent ensuring they had everything they needed while I often went without. I had poured my soul into this house, every floorboard creaking with memories, every wall echoing laughter and tears. This wasn't just property. It was my legacy. In that moment of clarity, I took a step back, allowing a pause in the chaos, and with it came an understanding. This wasn't just about my house. It was about the love, the care, and the importance of family ties that had unraveled over the years. I began to see my children's motivations were rooted in fear. Fear of losing me, fear of the unknown, fear that they weren't prepared to face what lay ahead. As I slowly peeled back the layers of their treachery, I recognized their anxiety mirrored my own. They thought if they could claim ownership over my home, they would somehow claim a piece of me. But they had it all wrong. It was never about possession. It was about the bonds we shared. When I confronted them, it was with a calm strength that surprised even myself. I laid out the truth, not with anger, but with the conviction of a woman who had endured much, yet still stood tall. I explained that this place was as much a part of them as it was of me, a testament to our family's journey. I watched as realization washed over their faces, that this was a fight they could not win because the heart of this home was love, not ownership. It became clear that the bond we had was infinitely more valuable than anything material. In the end, they didn't take the house from me. They simply rediscovered the home we could still build together, one rooted in understanding and respect. As I sit by the window, tracing the delicate patterns of the sunlight filtering through the leaves, I find a sense of serenity enveloping me. Life, with all its twists and turns, has a way of teaching us lessons we never asked to learn, yet somehow needed to. They made a plan against me, yes, but in that moment of darkness, I discovered the light that had been quietly simmering within me all along. In the quiet corners of this old house, I've come to understand the whispers of the walls, each creak telling a story of resilience, love, and the strength of one's spirit. I have spent my days nurturing hope, planting seeds of joy within the soil of my memories. It's here that I've learned the true meaning of home, not merely the bricks and mortar, but the love that fills each room and the laughter that dances through the halls. What was once a painful betrayal has transformed into an unexpected gift, one that has deepened my appreciation for those who stand by me and for the moments that remind me of my own fortitude. I watch the world outside, with its bustling noise and vibrant colors, and I smile, for I have found a quiet power in my acceptance. I am not merely surviving, I am thriving, learning to embrace each day as it comes with an open heart and a gentle spirit. So, dear listener, if you've been with me until the end of this tale, thank you for sharing this time. I hope my story has touched you in some way, igniting a flicker of connection in your heart. If you felt something resonate, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share where you are listening from in the comments below. Perhaps, just perhaps, the next story we tell here will be yours, woven into the beautiful tapestry of our shared human experience.